Hello and welcome to the third and last video in the series The War in the Ukraine and what we can learn from a communication perspective. As I pointed out in earlier videos, and please free to refer to those, this war is a result of violating many fundamental communication principles. As I stated before, the war in the Ukraine, the needless suffering and dying was totally unavoidable and there is a result, to a large part, to poor communication. As I pointed out in earlier videos, as a disclaimer, I love the Ukrainian people, I love the Russian people, I love people in general. As a business expert, I have been using my free time to working on charity projects all over the world. I have served any people group from homeless people, alcoholics, drug addicts, to orphans, to disadvantaged people, to people struggling in building their business, to people in business who wanted to make their business more successfully. I have served in the Russian-speaking countries in Kazakhstan, Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, and other countries. And what I want to point out is, as a disclaimer, these videos are not to point fingers. We are in a desperate situation which is likely to lead to a third world war if the parties are not turning around and start communicating in a better way. As I always say, in any business conflict, in any marital or a social or friendship conflict, hardly ever there's a situation where one side is 100% right and the other person is just a saint and have done everything right. So in this video, I want to point out that NATO in this case has violated fundamental communication principles, which has led to the conflict. At the same time, I'm not abdicting guilt or problems or faults that Russia has contributed to the issue. But in this case, I think it is so important to look at the side and say, what can we learn from that? How can we take that to our business and our personal life situations? So in the earlier videos, I talked about a number of key communication principles that NATO has violated. Now we are in a situation which is quite dangerous. It's almost the outcome of the previous mistakes made. Now we see that NATO is playing tough. And NATO playing tough is like when you are in a business situation. If you're trying to play tough rather than seeking a win-win situation, nobody wins. And the problem is, the tougher you play, the more the wounds, the more the damage, the more the people dying, the more the people suffering. And it is easy for a politician to make a hard stand where a civilian who is just losing a child or a loved one is suffering and paying the price. It is easy for a politician with big money and good income to make decisions that is affecting the lower class and middle class and people, hundreds of millions of people in Europe having a hard time making a living. Playing tough is oftentimes not the best approach. There may be a time in certain situations, but I would suggest that in this case, a more sober approach is likely to lead to better outcome. So let's look at it. The entire conflict could have been avoided if Ukraine had agreed to stay neutral. Now, my question is, to start out with, what is wrong about neutrality? Has Switzerland been at a disadvantage? Or has it even worked in their favor of being neutral? Has it worked as a disadvantage to Austria to be neutral? So why can Ukraine not be neutral? Why does it have to be part of a military alliance against Russia? So the problem here is that neutrality was rejected from the outset. And that would have been a viable solution. Now, in any business situation, you always seek a win-win situation, and especially a sustainable solution, because you want to have a situation where both parties can work together long term, and especially in countries that have to live in harmony. What I'm missing in NATO approach was a sustainable approach where both sides can feel comfortable. And when people play tough and not seeking win-win anymore, then the worst of all situations comes. And that typically ends a disaster. In this case, it could end in a third world country. In a third world war. Now, let's consider the facts. Russia's military armament, weaponry, etc. is not up to standard. Before the war even started, I also already predicted what would happen, and I communicated clearly on record that Russia could never win the war. Not enough people, not enough good equipment, not enough logistics. So that was a given. Everything I predicted so far happened. Now, the situation is now you have NATO de facto in war with Russia. How can you say that, Alex? Well, if you provide the intelligence to kill the highest generals in the Russian army, you have already declared war on Russia. If you help, in this case America, with not only intelligence, but with a technical attack on a ship that helps to sink it, then you have declared war on this country. And in this case, we even have Britain, who have suggested that Ukraine shoots rocket on Russian territory. Now, where does it end? And again, I want to bring it back to, please understand the Russian people. Russian people, by their soul, they're not backing down. They're dying, but they're not giving in. If you push Russia into such a corner, Russia will respond with heavy weaponry, which could lead to a nuclear war. Now, one thing I want to give to your consideration. When I was traveling in Armenia, I had the opportunity to travel with an Armenian military official. And he shared with me how he actually and his unit is managing dealing Russian weaponry. There are weapons out that are able to eradicate everything in a 10-mile radius. Now, Russia has not used these weapons. Why haven't they? If they had been purely evil and the devil, they could have ended the war in 3 days, wiping out entire cities in the Ukraine. But they didn't do that. And my question is, why did they not do it if they are purely evil? Another question that I raise, and that surprises me, in the second Iraqi war, hundreds of thousands of people died. How many people talk about it? How many people care about it? Now in Ukraine, sadly, thousands of civilians have died and thousands of soldiers. What is that compared to the Iraqi war? The second Iraq war was led by the US. Why are we not condemning hundreds of thousands of people dying and later on destabilizing an entire region, leading again to even hundreds of thousands more deaths? But we are talking about several thousand civilians and soldiers killed. So where is the relationship? While I'm caring about every single life, I'm coming out of a family of doctors and scientists who have sacrificed their lives. Why are we not talking about other things as well? Why do we have that bias against Russia? And one thing I want to also make sure, if Russia would have been more aggressively, they would have earned or gained a military success much faster before the weapons from NATO had arrived. But Russia chose to spare actually the heavy losses on the civilians. In such a war, thousands of civilians dying, that is horrific, but it is very small in compared to other wars. Allow me to share with you, part of my family comes of Dresden. In one night, British bomber pilots killed 200 to 300,000 civilians in one night. Nobody's talking about it. So if Russian atrocities of several thousand killing several thousand civilians in Ukraine is horrific, and it is horrific, then what is the murder of an entire city like Dresden, wiping out civilians, butchering, killing, destroying 200 to 300,000 civilians in one night? So why am I saying that? Do I want to put guilt on certain behaviors in former wars? No. Every single person suffering is one person too much. Every tear shed, every child crying, every person lamenting over a loved one is horrific and should be avoided. But what I'm saying is, and I'm trying to help here, let's communicate. Let's try to resolve the issues through communication. If we start demonizing the other party, make them pure devils, then we cannot resolve the conflict. At the moment, we have hundreds of millions of people in Europe, especially lower income people, middle class people, who are suffering under the sanctions. The people in Russia suffering. We have people in developing countries having food crises. So it is not about pride. It is not about winning and being right. It is about resolving the situation. And this is what we owe to the Ukrainian people and what we owe to the people in the entire world. So this video is more about the war than actually drilling out business principles. But it is an example how business situations or private matters, conflicts, can horrifically go wrong. A war is always a demonstration of communication that has broken down, of respect and dignity towards the other party, and unwillingness to seek a win-win situation without military conflict. Because otherwise, we may find ourselves in a situation right now like in the Ukraine. It will be extremely difficult to resolve the situation now. A lot of de-escalation is necessary. Let this situation in the Ukraine be a horrific example of what happens if we don't follow basic fundamental communication principles. It leads to the destruction of businesses and personal relationships. And it can have horrific ends otherwise. Now this brings me to the end of this video and also to this series. If you have comments, suggestions, disagreement, always welcome. Feel free to send me an email or connect with me through WeChat. You may scan in the QR code. Also, you may follow me on LinkedIn, where 23,000 leaders, experts, and other business professionals follow me. Thank you and all the best.